Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Salome Mekhuzla. I'm the Director of Regional Development at the WFH. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the WFH Development Grant Program webinar. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that we have simultaneous translation to several languages during our webinar today. In particular, we have Spanish and French, and we were also able to provide Arabic translation into Arabic upon request of several of our participants. So on the next slide, you will see, we ask you now to look at the bottom of the screen, and you will be able to see a little sign, a globe sign with interpretation written on it. So please press on it and select your language of preference now. I will wait a few seconds to give you some time to switch to the language of your preference. Okay, if I could ask those of you that have switched, if you could please just give us a little sign in chat or write OK or anything you want, just give us a sign that it worked. So for Spanish, you would switch, you would pick Spanish, French, or for Arabic. Unfortunately, there is no language channel for that in Zoom, so we've borrowed the German channel for that.
In the Q&A I see from Masood, he said, perfect.
Okay, great. I see a few okays also in the chat, so I think it's working. So we could continue. Yeah. Thank you very much. As you all know, beginning of July, the WFH has announced a call for applications for the Development Grant Program. We are organizing this webinar in order to provide you with information on the 2020 call for applications, what are the procedures, requirements, the process, and also to respond to your questions related to the program, the application process, but also questions about proposal development and monitoring of the project outcomes. This is why when we ask you to register, we had asked you a few questions, and we've specifically requested that you submit some questions in advance. So what we did is a majority of the questions submitted were related to the application process requirements, the developing of SMART objectives and outcomes measurement, as well as budget development. So what we did, we took these questions and prepared our presentations based on those questions today. We also have a Q&A session where we will respond to the ongoing questions that keep coming in. Next slide, please. So these are so as I spoke about the objectives of the webinar, subsequently this is the agenda for us today. So I will cover the presentation on the DGP program, the Development Grant Program, provide the overview of the program, application process, and what are the requirements. And then I will hand over to Don Rotellini, who will present to you the key elements of project proposal writing. So these are specifically related to the questions that you had submitted. Many of you know Dawn. She is the Chief Operating Officer at the National Hemophilia Foundation, our NMO in the USA. She is also the member of the Board of Directors of the WFH and the Chair of the Development Grant Selection Committee. We have also put aside some time for Q&A, as I said, to cover the specific questions. So what I would ask you to do is please type in your questions in the Q&A box as we speak, but we will respond to them at the end of our presentations. Next slide, please. So with this, I will move ahead and provide you with the overview of the Development Grant Program guidelines and the application process. So what is the program about? So the Development Grant Program is designed to encourage new and innovative ideas and projects that address an unmet need and a problem in the bleeding disorders community in your country. So these are a one-time financial grant up to, as I say, up to $25,000 US to support new projects. And projects with a duration of anywhere between 6 to 24 months. And the word new and innovative, I think, has become especially relevant in today's world. Next slide, please. As the COVID-19 pandemic has challenged us to all to reinvent ourselves and to be more innovative and to adapt the way we deliver our programs and services. The WFH for a few months now has been organizing virtual meetings and learning sessions to continue to engage our bleeding disorders community globally. I know that also many of your organizations have been actively using online platforms in your work. With the Development Grant Program 2020 call for applications, the WFH aims to assist its NMOs, your organizations, in developing and strengthening your skills so that you can continue providing programs and support to the bleeding disorders community in your countries in this fast-changing environment. Provide you with tools to help you create and implement projects, development projects, and to empower you to better advocate for sustaining existing standards of care or further improving them in your countries. And I think advocacy has become especially important in this challenging times nowadays. Next slide, please. I would like to also thank our sponsors, the Sanofi Genzyme, that has been providing the exclusive funding for the development grant program for already a third year now. Next slide. So who can apply? And we have received actually many questions throughout this past 2 weeks about this. So the development grant program is open to all WFH national member organizations. So project proposals can be accepted from both so-called developing and developed NMOs, or the NMOs from both high income or low income countries. The applications can be submitted in English, Spanish, and French. We receive applications in all 3 WFH official languages. We had several questions about who can apply and the language of application. So I wanted to read out a few questions and answer them as we go along the presentation. So there was a question, can an NMO which is implementing another WFH program apply for the development grant program? Yes, as long as the 2 projects do not overlap. So when you think about submitting the development grant program, see what are the priority areas, what are the main objectives of your ongoing project with the WFH. Is it through a GAP program, maybe a Cornerstone Initiative country program, or maybe through twinning? So make sure that the objectives do not overlap and activities. But also you need to be confident that you have the resources to implement both projects in parallel. Another question was, is the development grant program accessible to individuals, students, independent researchers, or can an individual, for example, a patient in an NMO apply for a grant and have his colleagues outside the NMO support? So the main applicant, the only receiver of the grant, actually grant recipient, can be the WFH national member organization, so the NMO. So what this means is that once we issue the grant, our national member organization is responsible for its implementation, reporting, and demonstrating the results of the program. Having said that, you as an NMO, there may be a person with a bleeding disorder who has a great project idea that you've learned about, and they are a member of your organization, and you want to engage them and submit this project idea. But the application should come from the NMO, and as an organization, you are responsible for implementing the project. So this individual can, of course, be the part of the implementing team, but the organization is responsible. Also, we do ask as well that when you submit the application, the board of the NMO or the executive committee should have approved this application. There was a question about the use of language, specifically, does the project proposal need to use formal language? We've received some comments that it was challenging for some of you to submit in a very formal English, let's say, an application. And I would say that no, it doesn't have to use formal language as long as it is clear and we understand what you're trying to accomplish and how are you trying to accomplish it. So try to be clear, but you can use ordinary, daily English. It doesn't have to be a formal English, and you should not spend resources to get it, edited or by professionals or rewritten. Next slide, please. Yeah. So there are some other eligibility requirements as well. The animals that have previously received a development grant may apply for funding again for a new project with two conditions. So all required reports have been completed from the previous project and submitted to the WFH, and a one-year grant cycle should have passed between the end of your project and the new application. Also, animals who have previously applied and were not successful, they cannot resubmit the same proposal. It has to be significantly revised or a new proposal. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there is a development grant selection committee that Dawn is the chair of. It consists of several WFH lay board members and experienced animal leaders from various parts of the world. The committee will review all your applications and they actually score them based on the criteria that are here on the slide. After that, applications are also discussed in person at the committee meeting, well, in this case, a conference call, and final decisions are made which projects will be awarded funding. So this is the process that we go through. The selection criteria are, and I will repeat them, they are listed here, but I will repeat them as well. So it's how the project relates to the WFH comprehensive development model and our strategic plan, and how it fits with the other activities of the patient organization. Projects must have clearly defined SMART objectives, and I think this is something we cannot stress enough how important it is, and we will be speaking about the SMART objectives and their development later on today as well. Extent to which the project addresses local patient organization needs and the country needs. And I think in this sense you should very much think about what are the needs today and how they have been affected also with the pandemic, because I think a lot of our work has been affected, and we had to shift our priorities, not just the way we deliver the programs, but also revisit our priorities. And you have also seen how regional managers have been reaching out to you proactively and revising the plans for some of the projects we have had planned throughout the year. So this is really the time to think what is really needed for my community today. Another criteria is proposal merits and innovative approaches, and this is also very relevant today, and how the project contributes to longer-term sustainable improvements in advocacy and comprehensive care in their home countries. And of course, the cost effectiveness of the proposal. So the committee looks at the budget as well. So these are the criteria, and there is a score given to each of the criteria, and the committee members, they use these criteria to score your proposals and afterwards discuss them in person as well. We had several questions on how does the committee identify the best projects and how the decisions are made. So I hope this answered your questions. Also, there was an interesting question submitted, which I want to read out and answer here. Are you more likely to accept projects with lower or higher budgets? If a very strong project that has well-defined budget, with each cost justified and demonstrated how it serves the achievement of project objectives is submitted, I think the committee would approve that, even if it requests the maximum amount of allowed funding. However, committee may also, once reviewing your proposal, may see that there is an interesting project idea and they would like to support it, but they don't feel that all the costs in the budget are necessarily justified, or they don't think that it really is indispensable to reach the objectives of the set project. So in that case, they may still approve the project, but with less funding. So it really depends, and it is important how you match each line budget item, let's say, with the activity, and how each activity then matches the objectives of the project. Next slide, please. There are also certain activities that are or types of costs that are not eligible for funding under the development grant program, and these are the payment of salaries, normal operation costs of the NMO. So this would be typically, office rent or monthly bills and so on. We have though added one exception this year that we didn't have in the guidelines, program guidelines before. So we were willing to make exceptions and support the costs for internet or other communication tools and technical platforms that are directly required for delivery of project activities. And the reason for that was the COVID-19 pandemic, and that many of us had to switch our in-person activities to online activities. So we understand that you may incur significantly higher costs for communications, internet, and different software in order to be able to deliver your activities. So this is why the exceptions could be made for that. But when you submit the proposal, and if you have such costs in the budget, please make sure to show that this is really needed for the delivery of the activities. Other types of costs that cannot be funded would be the projects that are seeking to generate income for individuals or organizations, projects or initiatives related to the purchase or production of treatment products, and projects mainly focusing on infrastructure improvement or renovation costs, ongoing or completed projects where expenses have already been incurred, or academic research or scientific publications. So these are the activities or costs that are not eligible for funding under the DGP program. Next slide, please. Just here looking in parallel, there are comments. Okay. So finally, I would like to remind you of the timeline of the 2020 call for applications. The deadline to submit the applications this year is 25th August. And after that, what we do is we receive applications in English, sometimes also French and Spanish. We translate those and prepare summaries and submit the whole package to the committee members, the grant selection committee members. And then by late September, there will be a committee meeting where the decision on project selected for funding will be made. And afterwards, we will be able to communicate the results to you in October, and the funding can be already, grants can be dispersed in October 2020. So this is something important for you to know when you plan for the start date of the project. Don't plan projects to start until late October. So it would be second part of October or from November 2020. This is all from me. I will pause here. And I saw a few questions coming in and comments, so we will keep them for the Q&A session. I will hand over now to Dawn, who will share with you some useful recommendations and tips on the key elements on project proposal development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salome. Okay, well, let's just dive right in. So I know one of the first questions that we get, because this is a major part of submitting your grant, is we talk about the SMART objectives. And we did a webinar a year ago about the SMART objectives, but we really still continue to, to receive a lot of questions about that. And as the grant committee has reviewed the past proposals, we realize we have to talk a little bit more about what is a SMART objective and what is a SMART goal. So, you're asking yourself specifically, this is the S in S.M.A.R.T, SMART objectives. What do I want to accomplish? Be specific. So you must state precisely and in performance terms. So what do I want to accomplish? And then now think about to yourself, how do I specifically state it and how will it be measured? Use action verbs such as increase, reduce, improve, decrease, and let's go to the next slide, please. So one of the questions that came in was, so many things need to be done in our country. How do I not put them all in one grant? So this is probably the most difficult, because when you start to think about, okay, I've got to have my grant written by August and submitted. I'm going to get the money in October to be able to implement this. Within 2 short months, you have to figure out how you're going to actually implement this. So your process between now and August 25th is to prioritize. I totally understand there are so many goals that we all have. What you have to ask yourself, what is the most important impact that I can put into place right now? What is the thing that if I get this one thing accomplished will actually help my NMO move forward in areas of advocacy in the future? So you have to prioritize. One way to do that is to have a piece of paper or a board, and you just write down every single thing you want to accomplish. Every single thing. If money were no object, what would I be doing? You list all of that out in no order particular. And then you take the time to say, what can I do this? What is the first thing? What is the most important thing? And you put a number 1 there. What is not realistic unless I accomplish goals 1 through 5? So those come at the bottom. So you have to prioritize it. If your grant is not specific, the committee cannot score it and you won't get the funding. That's why this is so important. For any grant that you write, whether it's for WFH or whether it's for another company foundation, the funder must be able to see that you can actually accomplish your goals that are in your grant proposal. And then if you accomplish them, you have to trust that because of that success, you will get funding in the future to be able to accomplish your other goals. Next slide, please. So the M in S.M.A.R.T objectives is measurable. I've already talked about that in the specific area. But remember, can you track the progress and measure the outcomes? That's your key question right here under measurable. Does it accomplish what I want to do? But then how do I state it in a term to be able to put a measurement on top of it? You have to have concrete metrics for monitoring progress and attainment. So what does success look like? Measurement has to be clearly and specifically stated, just like the S for the specific. It has to be realistic and feasible. If you say that you want to accomplish something for your whole country that has never been done before and it's going to radically change everything going forward, what are all the steps that are going to be in place for you to be able to accomplish that? And then you must focus on the outcomes in the measurement part, not just the activities. So I may do 2 trainings. Well, that's great. 2 trainings is specific and that's a number, but what is your goal at the end? So how many people are you training? How many people will change the way they think or do things as a result of the training? Next slide, please. So here's an example. The objective here, I'm just making this up, is the NMO will create a consistent communication strategy for 2021. That is a lovely big picture statement. We've prioritized this. We've agreed at our NMO. We must have a communication strategy. We're going to plan this out. And so here's an example of measurable. 10 communication messages will be designed for education and advocacy by Q2 based on my activities calendar. 35 youth from our NMO will be trained on best communication practices by Q3. 25 of the trained NMO will be in volunteer communications positions and will manage our social media messaging every week per direction from the NMO to their chapters by Q4. So what is the goal that you have that is hard to measure? So this was a big question that came in from many of the NMOs. You know, what if it's very hard to measure? You have to be able to measure it in some way, because otherwise, how do the grantors know whether you were successful or not? So you might have a time-bound goal. It might be, you see here, that I have other measurements in place, but I also say specifically when these tasks will be done. If it is too difficult to measure, Your time-bound goals, that can work as well. You can say, I will have X accomplished by Q1 or May 31st or whatever is that, you know, timeline. But you have to create the goal. It must either be time-bound, it could be outcomes. And the example is like, we will accomplish X, Y, and Z by Q4 of 2021. Okay, next slide, please. So the A in SMART objectives is achievable. So can this goal be realistically achieved within the time frame of the grant? If you say, you know, these grants may be achieved within 6 months to 24 months. And if you're looking down the line and you're thinking, I am going to change the behavior and the outcome of this goal, it's going to impact people, and I'm going to be able to do that within 24 months, work backwards from that date. What are the activities that you must have in place from a backwards place to be able to move that forward? So the goal and objective is totally within your scope of influence. So you must be able to control that outcome with your activities. If it is something that, for example, in the United States, we may want legislature to pass a law for standards of care for bleeding disorders in our country. That is a really good goal. I may be able to do activities to be able to advocate for something, how many trainings, how many times I meet with legislators. Ultimately, though, I cannot fully control what Congress will do, especially in the United States, sidebar, but I cannot control what Congress will do within 24 months period of time. I have to be very realistic that I can educate, and that could be my goal, to educate Congress members on this X project. But getting them to pass a resolution or a bill within 2 years is very unrealistic and unachievable. So the other question is, do you have adequate resources to help you actually achieve that goal? Can the grant money cover all the activities? And if not, where are you going to get that support? That's really important. Where will that partnership and money come from? Next slide, please. So here's an example of what I just gave you under measurable. I've realized that in putting out my communications project that I wasn't very realistic about how much time it was going to take. And knowing that I'm going to get my grant money by October of 2020 means that if I'm waiting until Q2 to do trainings or creating the communications messages, if my goal for 2021 was to have a communication strategy, waiting until the end of Q2 to actually list all the questions and figure that out, I've already wasted 6 months. So I really need to be smart about that. So I've adjusted this for my achievable of being able to reach the goal of my project. I'm actually going to create the 10 communication messages by Q4. So remember I talked about the end of the year. So I wanted to accomplish a communication plan for 2021. So I backed that up then from the goal of 2021 of having accomplished all these tasks. Now I recognize I am off by 3 quarters. I need to change this. 35 youth from the NMO must be trained by Q1 in January so that they can do the work for the rest of the year. 25 of the trained youth will be in volunteer communications positions. I don't have the ability to wait another 3 months to put them in those positions. I need them to be in place right after their training. So as soon as they get trained in January, then in February, they will be out there. So they have 10 months for the rest of the year to help get out the messaging. So one of the questions that came in, how do we measure outcomes in a large country? If you have multiple chapters or multiple volunteers, you have to have meetings with them. You have to have communication with them. You must help them understand that the essential NMO goal that you applied for the grant, that is what the key is for all of them. You must speak with one voice. And so you have to help them achieve, put measurements in place for them that align back to your NMO goal. The other thing that helps with is that you'll compile those outcomes throughout the chapters in the country, or throughout the volunteers in your country. That will actually, their input into their own reports, you compile those into your NMO report. That gives so much more data to your funder and to WFH and the committee. Next slide, please. So the R is realistic or relevant. Can I realistically reach my objectives? Are the project objectives relevant to the local needs? Salome already covered that. That's something that's very important. Sometimes when we see a dollar amount of $25,000, oh my gosh, I could be doing so much. But in reality, if it does not meet or help you achieve something that's going to be crucial to your NMO and to WFH's strategic plan, then it's actually not going to be funded, even if it sounds like the best thing in the world, because what it may do is take you off task and take you away from doing the crucial things your NMO has to do on a day-to-day basis. Next slide, please. So the questions you have to ask yourself: why should we achieve this goal and objective? Remember back when I was talking about prioritization, when you have so many things you want to do? This is going to help you figure out your priority. So ask yourself, why should I try to achieve this? What is the purpose or the benefit to my NMO or to people with bleeding disorders in my NMO? Does this really align with our NMO's mission? Does this focus on actual outcomes versus just the tasks that you want to do? So remember, you're trying to move whatever forward, right? So a communication strategy, for example. So do these activities help me achieve that goal? And did you describe why this outcome is important in your grant? So many times it says, a grant may come in and it'll say, we want to accomplish teaching doctors about bleeding disorders so people can have access, so that it'll just say, we want to teach all doctors in our country about bleeding disorders. Well, why? What is the goal of that? Think about if I'm reading this for the first time and I don't know the situation in your NMO, how do I know what is that really going to accomplish? I need to know, what's your healthcare system like? Well, because people with bleeding disorders can't see an HTC, there's only one HTC in my country, I must teach all the doctors about this so that they can help these patients. Whatever that why is, that has to be spoken about in your grant proposal. The next slide, please. So time bound. This is so important. This goes to what I was talking about earlier. If the end of my grant cycle is the end of 2021, then I have to achieve my goals by the end of 2021. And I also have to be able to prove in my reports that I was able to move the project forward. So when does the goal have to be completed? Is there enough time in your grant period to actually be able to accomplish this? Allow for things to go wrong. Who knew we were going to be in a pandemic at this time? Many of you are going to have to rethink our normal face-to-face trainings, our normal face-to-face gatherings. So think about that. How do I do this in a virtual way? Have a plan B in the back of your mind. If this doesn't work, then we can do this. Identify the realistic target completion date and outline those tasks going backwards. And then include a plan to monitor your progress. Once you put all this together in your grant, and you're working away, you get 3 months into your project, it shouldn't be a surprise to you that, oh, that's right, I said in my grant I would do X, Y, this, and this by April, and then you realize I was working on only task 1, and now it's April, and I haven't done the other 3 tasks. So put in monitoring for yourself in your calendar. Put little check marks through your calendar through the year. I said I would have this accomplished by this date. Then go back. Oh, what do I need to do to get there? Next slide, please. So going back to the initial plan I had in place for my communication strategy, that is the big reason that I went back and crossed off my original plans and put in more realistic time-bound goals. And is this now the time to look at Q&A, do you think, Salome?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, we could.
Okay. So I see some very specific questions about, can an NMO have a project to improve storage facilities for treatment products at HTCs? I'm going to ask you, Salome, to talk to that, because I don't know.
Yes. So I've also mentioned earlier when we provide the list of the kinds of costs that are not eligible for funding, renovation costs is one of them. So it depends. If your project is purely about that, it would not be eligible, unfortunately, for the DGP program, but it may be a small part of the overall bigger project that has other objectives as well. So I think it depends on that and the specific case. So something to keep in mind, is that a small, reasonably small cost of overall larger project, or is it purely about improving the facilities? If it's the latter, then unfortunately, no, it would not be eligible for funding. There is another question that's also related to funding. We could answer that as well, maybe, Dawn.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I will read it out. So there is a question about, can grants for laboratory reagents and diagnostic equipment be considered? So again, the laboratory reagents or equipment, this would not be a project on its own, right? What is the objective of it? The objective probably of your project would be to improve diagnosis of hemophilia or VWD, or maybe it's about inhibitor testing, I don't know. So it's related to improving diagnosis and identification of patients. So you could possibly include some reasonable amount of cost for either the reagents or the equipment. Equipment may cost quite expensive and it may eat up most of the budget, but we have supported the purchase of reagents through other programs as well. So this is something that could be eligible. But it also depends how it fits within the overall scope of the project.
Yes. Yeah. Purchasing equipment, that in itself is not a project, right? So what would be the purpose of purchasing that equipment? How would you measure the outcomes of the purchase of that equipment? And how would that fit in the overall scope of your grant? Next slide, please. So let's talk a lot about developing the budget. This was, so many questions came in with this. This is a difficult part. I think that Salome brought this up earlier, but you know, the question about, are you more likely to accept projects with lower or higher budgets? It's actually not the lower or the higher that is the issue. It is, what is the money specifical? Yes, I can slow down. Sorry. I get going, and you're right. Thank you for the reminder. What is the specific reason for your project? That is more important than how much money you put in there. However, so many NMOs see, I can get $25,000 to be able to do work in my country. And so instead of being specific to a goal, they decide, I'm going to use this money for everything that I want to do and get accomplished. And it may not be related to that goal. And so it's really more important to focus on the project that you have prioritized than it is to try to use all the money. The grants selection committee will only look at what the activities are to accomplish what you said your goal were. And if there's extra things in there, then you won't get full funding for the grant. So what costs are required for implementation of each project activity? We are going to give an example of a budget that you can take a picture of with your phone, and then you can kind of use it later to do this. But that's what you need to concentrate on, or what are the costs that are required for each project activity. Be realistic. Use your past experience and your lessons learned from past projects that you've done. Provide a budget for each activity. Many times what I have seen in the grant proposals is in sort of an overall budget, which is very good to have, but then you have to break out the activities and what those costs are going to be as well. If you say, I'm going to train, going back to my communications project, I'm going to train 25 youth leaders in a communications plan, and you just say, that's going to be $10,000. Well, I have no idea where the $10,000 is going. Is it hotel cost? Is it travel cost? Is it meal cost? What are the things that are going to be part of that training budget? That's something that we need to know. And it's very helpful for us because in every country, the cost of doing those things varies. Next slide, please. So here's an example, a 2-day advocacy training for 25 NMO volunteers. So what will you budget for this training event? Can you negotiate and get the venue for little cost or free? That's the first thing that we try to do in any of these projects, including in the US. Do the participants need accommodation? Do some of the local participants, could they stay at their home and not need accommodation, and then allowing for funds for your farther away participants? So think about that. Not everyone needs to stay at the hotel if they live 10 minutes away or even a half an hour away. What are your transportation costs? Do people need to take the train, which may be less expensive than flying in? Is there a way for if somebody is driving? What are the various transportation costs? I don't see one of the things that also to think about, do your speakers need costs, to be covered for transportation or accommodation? What about meals? If you're bringing someone in at 10 a.m. in the morning, you can skip breakfast. I mean, sorry, but that's something we could provide coffee, but we don't need a full breakfast. So be thinking about your timing also with your training. What about handouts and materials that get distributed? Can you find someone that could make those copies for free? Is there a way to be able to give a sponsorship to a local printer to say your name will go to all of these participants if you donate the cost of printing? Next slide. So here's a great, this budget example. So we've got the activity. You see the heading across. It's what is the description, the budget description, and then the cost in US dollars. So here's the example, training for NMO chapter volunteers. So we've broken this down. It's $60 for the transportation costs for 5 people, and that equals $300. Plus the rental of the meeting space for 2 full days is $800. Plus accommodation and meals for 20 participants for 2 days, that's $900. Did you notice that we didn't give transportation for all 25 NMO attendees? So that's because 5 people had to come in from far away. And that means the rest of them are getting there on their own. And of course, the rental meeting space for 2 full days, that's important. Make sure you include that. So our total cost here is $2,000 for that training. Next slide, please. Here's an example of an actual real NMO proposal that was sent to us. It was really well done, and we wanted to showcase this of how the NMO put this together in such a comprehensive budget proposal. So you see 4 hemophilia symposiums in medical institutions will be conducted. We've got the venue and food combined of $2,000. Land travel is going to cost $1,000. Air travel, $2,000. Accommodation and food is $2,000. And so that's a total of $7,000. Item number 2, 4 coagulation workshops in medical institutions. Venue and food are our only cost there, and that is $600 per the 4 workshops, and that's $2,400. Dental care workshops. In this case, the venue and the food, there's going to be 4 workshops, and those are $200 each. And the materials, we know that we're going to have to develop the materials and print them for each of those workshops. We've broken it down by workshop, so it's $50 per workshop, of total of $1,000. Production of educational materials. We're going to create some videos, and that's $1,000. Some presentation costs are $1,000, and posters we want to create is $100. And so the total here is $1,200. So this just gives you, and the total amount requested is $11,600. This is a very aggressive activity scheme. You're doing hemophilia symposiums, coagulation workshops, dental care workshops, and you're actually creating a video and posters as well. So this is something that would potentially go over a much longer period of time, potentially maybe 24 months, because that's a lot of activity to have to incorporate even while you're still doing the day-to-day activities in your NMO. Next slide, please. So this is when our time is for Q&A. And I'm looking in the Q&A box. Would the production of additional education materials be considered as a project? Absolutely. But remember, just the additional education materials isn't a project in itself. It's what is that going to accomplish? How will you distribute it? What do you expect people to gain from getting those educational materials? So be thinking about that. Another question, the project can pay professionals to teach a health team and patients to use a platform. Salome, is that one of the costs that we could include?
So of course we try to encourage, and that's what we do ourselves, WFH. I mean, we're lucky and blessed to have this wealth of expert volunteers in so many fields, right? So we always try to engage our volunteers as speakers, trainers when possible. So I think we'll do, but there have been exceptional cases when you need a very specific trainer on a given topic that is maybe not available as a volunteer in our community, or it can be a language barrier that you may know volunteers but not in your local language in your country. So I would look at that as exceptionally yes, if it's justifiable and you can explain why you could not engage a volunteer as a trainer, yes. But as a common practice, you've seen it through WFH, and Dawn is an example of that today. She, as a volunteer, we try to involve, as in most cases, volunteers as trainers or speakers, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and it's possible, yeah.
I know that some people have raised their hands. Can you please type your questions into the Q&A box, because we as panelists cannot see all of the participants, so we can't call on you. So please type in your questions. Another question was, whoops, somebody just typed it in, and of course my computer moved. We have a current grant to improve treatment care centers through Reach Out, mini coagulation workshops, etc., on different activities. However, we can't do that right now because of the lockdown, and we can't fly out to islands. How do we edit, not knowing when we can be allowed? So I will take the first stab at this, and then I would like Salome to follow up. But my question for you is there mini coagulation workshops, is this possible to pivot this and change it to a virtual experience? Could you do the coagulation workshop using Zoom or another platform? And that's what I would, and then how would you do it? What do you need to have in place? If you have the current grant and you come up with a way to overcome this face-to-face challenge, then please resubmit and reach out to Salome. But Salome, any other?
So I think, yes, of course, I think it's a little bit more challenging for lab workshops because they're so hands-on and you need the participants to be able to watch and be engaged, but it's possible. I've heard from other our member organizations that they've done this. We also have lab videos. I don't know if you're aware of those, but we have several videos of actually demonstrating how the lab tests are being performed. So this is something we could share also, and you could use it as part of the learning as a solution. But yeah, I think for such cases, and I've seen we've got a few other emails and comments about this, that if our activities currently from the ongoing DGP grants cannot be implemented, or we're not sure how we could change our plans, reach out to us and we can together work with you, and we can see how we can help you to revise your activities or even objectives. Sometimes you may think that right now for the next few months or a year, your objectives may have become less relevant. So maybe how we can modify the project so we can still carry on. Because I think first few months of the pandemic, we all were a little bit in the waiting mode, hoping that this will go away, but it's taking long, and we don't know how long we will be in this situation. So I think we should all help each other and try to find other ways to continue and keep going.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
How long we have to wait if we choose to wait it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There was a question also from the previously submitted ones, and I didn't want to forget it before we run out of time. There was a question about if the project, let me just read it out, I'm sorry. So some of the project outcomes may require funding to perform. An example is after training of HCPs, one will need some resources to follow up with them. So basically to monitor the impact or the results from the project. So can we work this expense into the budget? And yes, I would say yes. So this is something most probably you would have expenses to communicate with the previous participants of your trainings to see whether they are using or how they are using the skills and knowledge gained. So if I understand correctly this question, it was related to this example. So the monitoring and evaluation costs overall can be part of the project budget. So think about that. If you're not sure, you can reach out to us and we can help you provide some suggestions or how you can do that, or what kind of budget. I mean, what kind of budget that would vary per country. So it would be hard for us to give you some estimates, but what kind of costs that may require, we may be able to share some tips.
Yes. And then one of the questions that came in was, the results of some projects take more time to see. How can we demonstrate the long-term positive outcomes of a project? My advice to you is break the project into sections. So if the project is longer than a 24-month cycle, then what are pieces of that project that you could do in year 1 and then in year 2, and then measure those pieces of that long-term project? That would be my best advice. The introduction is difficult. How do you write a good project introduction that gives enough detail to preview the whole proposal? That is an excellent question, and I know that I also struggle with how much is too much information, how much is not enough information. But I will tell you this: tell your story. A good opening introduction is the story about what is currently going on, what will the project actually, what you hope that it will do for you, and what is the impact that you're hoping to achieve. And ask yourself, what happens if I don't do this? What happens if I am not able to make those changes in impact? So what would that outcome look like? Salome, any other tips?
No, I think that would be, I'm looking through also, there are so many questions coming in. I'm worried we will run out of time. There was a question, a very practical one, if the banking fees could be included, and it's an easy to answer. So I would say, yes, you could include it in the budget. So because especially for international transfer, I know that it can be quite high, and some intermediary banks charge as well. And so you could budget that in the proposal. Oh, especially for those who try to make very exact and budget rather than an estimate, you could include that. Yeah.
Another question came in. Do we need one person on the board or on board? Do they need to be in charge of processing the project, or could it be managed by a team? I think my advice for you is that if it's managed by a team, each team member has to have a specific job or task, because if everyone says, oh, well, as a team, we'll just do this, then no one actually takes ownership. So even if it's managed by a team and it's, you know, as an NMO, it may take many more people to implement your project than just one. But ultimately, one person has to report it out. So make sure you know who that is. And then if it's managed by a team, what are those team members responsible for? And then they have to report to that final person that's responsible for reporting out the results. Salome, do you have other?
Yeah, no, I think it's very important to have at least one person who is responsible. For us, it would be also very useful to know, so that there is one contact person we can reach out to on the follow-up on the project, or if we have any questions. And yeah, and of course you will still need a team of several people to implement it together, but one person who can coordinate with us and be responsible for the project. Yeah.
Yes. Another question is, how can you convince the project beneficiaries on complying with the project goal and getting a positive response from them? That is also a difficult task. So many times we know, right, what is needed, and you know the impact that it will make on your people with bleeding disorders or hemophilia, and then you can't get them to come to the training. So I think that some education in advance is needed, asking them, if we did this project and we were able to get this for you, is there value in that? If ultimately your attendees, your consumers, your people say, no, we don't care, we just want you, just do it, well, you have to let them know up front, we can't accomplish this task without your participation. And so if that is something that's critical, then you have to let them know up front. You may have to think about accomplishing your project in a different way if you can't get your community members to buy into it and to actually show up. Other suggestions, Salome?
Yeah. I would add to that. I absolutely agree. For me, that is something that I would even include in the project risks. You know, there is always, and in our proposal also there is a section about that, about project risks and how are you going to mitigate them. And it's something that can happen. You count on that this is the activities you want to implement for the beneficiaries, and maybe there is a lack of interest, or you overestimated the interest in this specific activities from the beneficiaries. There is another question that's I think maybe not directly but still related to this, because it falls for me under project risks. How do you design a project proposal for a country that is unstable politically, security-wise, etc.? So that is also something, it's very challenging, we understand, but we also know that many of the countries live with this reality, and many of the your organizations have been able to continue functioning and working regardless of the situation, political instability. So this is something, consider this and included in the project risks, and always think of having a plan B, that let's say if because of the instability we will not be able to do these activities, what else can we replace them with? Or maybe these objectives, this is one of the ways also to narrow down when you say we have several problems and how do we choose one. Maybe because of the political situation, it's not the right time to work on this problem, and maybe we should work on something else that is more feasible. So it also affects the feasibility and the successful implementation of the project. So it's very hard. I know it adds additional layer of the risks that don't depend on you internally, and it's something that can happen like the pandemic that's happening, and it's a risk that affected the implementation of all of our projects. But we find a way to adjust some of the activities, and others maybe have to be postponed, or it's not the right time. Yeah.
Yes.
I fear we're running out of time. Shall we take one more question? And
one more question that I think we can answer quickly. When a project is approved, should it start immediately, or could it start in the first few months of 2021? My question back to you is, when are you saying that you would complete the project? If you have the time to wait, then wait, but you will get your money in October of 2020, so why wait? So my question would be, maybe you do some extra planning in November and December, so that when you're ready to implement your project, you would be able to do so and really hit the ground running. But I don't think that you have to wait, but if you want to wait, think about what you need to do in advance of really kicking it off to make it successful.
mm-hmm.
There's so many questions.
Yes, I'm also
yes,
trying to still through them.
Several NMOs would be approved. Yes, I see.
So we do have several questions left unanswered from today, but also there were some that were submitted. So we can easily follow up individually to the ones where we can see your name, but there are several anonymous attendees. We would ask you if you could email us, if you prefer to email us individually to the development grants email with these questions. We would be able to answer it, specifically also understanding your context. So the several attendees that are as anonymous attendees, if you would like to receive a detailed answer, please follow up with us individually on the email. So
yes, there will be a recording of the webinar shared.
Yes. Like how we go along and we still continue.
I know.
Question. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's overwhelming to see the number of questions. We already received a good 50 questions just before the webinar start, and they will keep coming. And now there are so many questions from the Q&A box. So it proves that this was really necessary, this Q&A session, and we should think of maybe planning more as part of the application process in future as well. I wanted to thank our translators who have been trying to keep up with us while speaking fast. It was the first time also we used the simultaneous interpretation for the Zoom webinar, so I hope it went well. We will ask you those questions in the evaluation questionnaire after the webinar, so please tell us how it went, both technically and content-wise, if you feel that you've received answers to the questions and if the information was useful. Thank you very much to Dawn for all your hard work, not only for the webinars, but also for the implementation and making sure that the development grant program is a success. I wanted to remind you, our participants, that we did send you also the program guidelines, a document, as well as an application guide. So a lot of your questions that we've asked about specific questions in the application form, the application guide actually answers on each question on how to fill it out. And we have many examples in there, and this is available in 3 languages. We did email them to you, to all our NMOs, but also we have them on our website. So this is something that you could refer to, and many of your questions will be answered there. We'll try to follow up and respond to your questions individually as well in the coming days, because I understand this is time sensitive as some of your questions relate to the applications to be submitted. So thank you very much for your participation. Dawn, did you want to add anything?
No, I just wish you all the very best in crafting your proposals. Yes. And thank you all for being on and being engaged, and for all of the work that you're doing within your NMOs for people with bleeding disorders. Thank you. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.